Hello and welcome to a special edition of the Laptop Cinema Club. We are always so excited to talk to female filmmakers. We're especially grateful when we can connect with filmmakers in the WIF family, directors, writers, producers, editors, and more who have gone through the WIF career development and financing programs. One such person is my guest for today's conversation, Sabrina Doyle, whose new film Lorelei opens in select theaters and on demand Friday, July 30th. Lorelei is an exquisite exploration of resilience, second chances, family, and dreams. In the film, Waylon, played by Pablo Schreiber, reunites with his high school girlfriend Dolores, played by Jenna Malone, who's now a single mother of three, after 15 years in prison. The film was an official selection of the 2020 Tribeca Film Festival, won the jury prize at the 2020 Deauville American Film Festival, and the Jordan Ressler First Feature Film Award at the 2021 Miami Film Festival. The film's release was delayed by the impact of COVID, but we are so glad that it's finally going to be available for audiences to enjoy, particularly because Sabrina was the recipient of a Stella Artois Women in Film Finishing Fund grant, and we couldn't be more pleased with her success with this film. Sabrina's work has been celebrated by luminaries like the late Sir Alan Parker and supported by the Chimera Project, Google, Panavision, the Mary Pickford Foundation, and BAFTA Los Angeles. Prior to her career as a feature film director, she worked as a BBC journalist for 6 years, producing content for the UK's flagship news programs, including the Today program and Newsnight. As a first-generation high school graduate, she got top bachelor's and master's philosophy degrees from Cambridge University, and subsequently won a Fulbright scholarship to attend the American Film Institute, where she completed her MFA in film directing. Please welcome Sabrina Doyle. Sabrina, I'm so happy to talk to you.
I'm so happy to talk to you guys. I love women in film. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about Lorelei, and let's just start at the beginning here. One of the things that you've talked about and that I felt, is so illustrative of just like the incredible world building that you do in Lorelei is, you talk about the impact of your own working class background on both your focus and sort of artistic aims. Can you tell us a little bit about the origins of the story of this film and what made you want to tell this particular story?
Yeah, so I knew I wanted to tell a story set in a working class blue collar family. And I felt that I had a particular take on it. And my take was that I felt that sometimes films set in those kinds of communities can be very issue focused and very focused on the hardship of growing up hard up. And as a result, I feel sometimes the films are almost sadistic in putting their characters through a lot. And that's not the whole picture. It can be some of the picture, and that's important. It's important to shine a light on those things. But I do feel that it wasn't, I do feel that it isn't the whole picture. And that what I felt I wasn't seeing in depictions of those kinds of communities, and what was so important to me growing up was just the importance of the interior world of these characters, their interiority, their dreams, their resilience, what gets them through the day, the imaginings in their head that get them through the day. And so I call it the interiority of the characters that gives them depth, that, so you don't want to flatten a character out into just the issue that they represent, right? And so for me, growing up, storytelling was so important. I mean, I grew up with like a lot of families that don't have like formal education, there's a strong oral storytelling tradition. And I grew up, all my family were storytellers. I grew up hearing stories about, my parents were both migrants to the UK. So I grew up hearing about stories about their homelands and, far away places, or seemed far away to me when I was small. And my imagination was really important to me. I lived very vividly in my imagination, and I think it was my imagination that allowed me to imagine a different, maybe kind of life than the one I might have expected coming from that kind of background and that kind of family. So I really wanted to sort of make a film that gave the characters interiority and sort of really honed in on their dream life. And so that was kind of the intent with Lorelei. And then the financing for the film came via someone who'd never made a film before. He was a retired businessman, and he had been a stepfather in his life, and he'd always wanted to make a film, and decided, and I love this because it fits in with Lorelei's theme of second chances. He'd always wanted to make a film, decided to do so in his mid-70s, and kind of, finance Lorelei, but he wanted it to be about a stepdad. And so we put those two ideas together because he wanted it to be about stepdad because he had been a stepdad in his family, in his life rather. He'd raised 4 children who were not his biological children. And he said it was the hardest thing he's ever done, but also the most rewarding thing he's ever done. And he felt he hadn't seen that kind of masculinity in a film before, and that was an interesting subject for a film. And so it was a sort of combination of the idea of making a story about second chances, a stepfather. And I thought, well, what does a stepfather symbolize to me? I didn't grow up in a step family, so I had to find my way into that idea. And what I really liked about the idea is I think in our social media driven society, we don't really talk about our failures. We don't really talk, we promote ourselves, we promote our successes, especially in this industry, you have to, but we don't talk about our failures, and our failures are so much a part of who we are, and our resilience in coming back from our failures, and the resilience of hard up people and poor people as well. And so I really wanted to make a film. To me, what the stepfather story came to represent in my head was this idea of second chances, and maybe third, fourth, fifth chances, that you don't get it right the first time, and that it's through your failures and the accumulation of your failures and the constant move forward rather than the looking back, that you achieve a dream, not in the way you expected, not in the way you thought you would. I mean, so Wayland in the story becomes a dad, not to the children he thought he would become a dad to, not in the way he thought he would become a dad, but does become a dad. And I really liked that idea. I thought that was a kind of really nice idea for our times. And it's interesting that actually that's become the story of Lorelei's release because of COVID, is that the film has not come out in the way we thought it would. It hasn't sort of had the journey we thought it would because of COVID. But I think it's embracing what you have rather than what you thought you would have or what you wished you could have had, that you actually can achieve something. And so that was those were the sort of ideas around the film that led it to being the sort of story that it is.
I think that's fantastic. One of the things that you point out is the way in which when we see media that does center people from working class or poor backgrounds, there is often a sense that it's kind of an anthropological study that we're looking in from the outside. And there can be, a level of surveillance there and a lack of sort of humanity that's demonstrated there that's completely counter to what you're doing in Lorelei. One of the things that's so beautiful about this film is the way that we do feel it's a very particular story, but there's such a universal sense of grace that's present in the way that these characters come to forgive themselves and reckon with the ways that things haven't turned out the ways they expected them to, but they're also willing to extend that really vital sense of grace to others. And that's not something that we typically see in stories that feature characters who have gone to prison, single mothers, poor people in small towns. So it's a wonderful world that you've created here. Can I ask why is it that you set the film, because it does feel like a really specific kind of American story in a way, were you ever thinking about setting the story in the UK, among sort of people that you were more familiar with from having grown up there?
No, I mean, but it's interesting. I mean, I think it surprises people when they watch the film and they have an idea of who might have directed it, and then I come along. And I think that's always surprising to people. What I do have in common with the story is the work. I mean, I deep, in my heart understand that kind of family where you're shouting one minute and then you're loving the next, and that's sort of the chaos and the highs and the lows of growing up in that kind of household, and the hardship, the lack of a safety, the lack of sort of financial security and what that does to people. I understand all of that inherently from my background, but what I didn't understand was how to translate that. I mean, I didn't grow up in the Pacific Northwest, which is where we shot this film. And I was conscious of that writing this. And so I did many trips for about a year and a half before shooting the film. I did a bunch of trips from LA, where I'm based, up to Oregon, and just, every few months I'd go up and spend a few weeks there and knock on doors and just, combination of location scouting and research, and just talk to people who were unemployed or underemployed and, had been to prison and lived the kind of lives that the characters in the movie live. And it was, part of it was also just I was used to kind of doing that thing anyway, as from my journalistic background, doing that research. So that was really helpful. And, some of the things in the film come from research that I would never have been able to kind of imagine myself, but from stories that people told me. Like I spoke to someone who works with parolees, and he said, oh, a lot of parolees have like sensory like overload, especially when they have loud noises. Whistles really trigger them because they've heard whistles in prison. It really puts them on edge. And I thought that's something I would never have known without sort of speaking to him and doing that research. And I wrote that into the film, in the scene where Denim, the little kid, blows on a plastic whistle one morning, and it sort of makes Wayland anxious because it sort of ignites a memory of prison. But you know, I would say that, you know, again, coming back to this idea of stories, I really like, so part of my dreamscape when I was growing up in Europe, but on a diet of American cinema, was I consumed a lot of American cinema. I consumed, and as many Europeans do, and it becomes part of your, because it's a far off place that you see in images, you know, dreamlike images, but you don't visit. It becomes like a dream, and it becomes part of your imagination. And, you know, bikers and cheerleaders and all these diners, all these things that we don't have in the UK became part of my imagination growing up. And I think, so for me, so I had an idea of America before I ever set foot in America, which I think, and, you know, I remember growing up, you know, I was so, one of the first thing I saw, I think, that blew my mind, that made me kind of, I didn't know what a filmmaker or director was, but I knew that I was watching something special, was I remember watching Twin Peaks growing up. And I remember just thinking that there are, you know, and I think I often wonder if part of the decision to shoot in the Pacific Northwest was kind of inspired by Twin Peaks, which shot in the Pacific Northwest as well. But I had this kind of, you know, I just love the idea of the sort of the secrets in this, you know, this perfect Americana, and underneath it there are secrets, and there is, so, you know, these beautiful waterfalls and woods that are forests that are sort of shrouded in mist, and behind the mist, you know, behind the beauty, there's this kind of darkness, or there are these secrets or these nightmares or these dreams, you know, in my case, you know, not as dark as that, dreams, but I like sort of this idea of what was hidden behind these sort of epic landscapes. And I think that was partly what inspired me to sort of shoot in the Pacific Northwest. And then, you know, I was also sort of, you know, there's always a bit of insecurity when you're telling a story as an outsider. But I was reassured, you know, one of my favorite films about fatherhood, actually, that I really referenced when I was thinking about what Lorelei could be was Paris, Texas, which was also made by a European director working in the US. And I found that somewhat reassuring. I thought, well, if, you know, I mean, you know, if he can do it, maybe I can have a stab at it.
I love that. I mean, I do think that there perhaps is a quality of, I won't say objectivity, but certainly, you know, a sense that having a little bit of distance from the community that you're presenting can offer a certain kind of perspective. It is by no means the only perspective or the best perspective, but it does offer you, you know, that distance, a way of really honing in on things that perhaps if you're too close to something, you might take as natural, you might not see, and that's absolutely evident here. I want to talk a little bit more about the research that you did, because I think it's through this research that you found some of the non-actors who wound up being in the film, right? I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what shooting was like, how you worked with both, you know, your lead actors, Pablo and Jenna, who are just amazing in this film. You know, and obviously, you know, old hands, professionals at being on set, working with them and with the non-actors to sort of develop, you know, the performances that you wanted to bring to screen. Like, what were those conversations like as you shot the film?
Yeah, well, Pablo and Jenna actually not only were tremendous in their own characters, and really, you know, really sort of, I think, have very complementary acting styles, I think, as actors that create this kind of chemistry that's built on friction, I think, in the film, which really works for the characters, for Wayland and Dolores. So for Wayland, I think the film rests on his shoulders. She's a big guy, he's 6'5". The film literally kind of sits, you know, revolves around him, sits on him. And I think with Dolores and Pablo is a sort of very classically trained actor and kind of worked in theater and has this sort of classical grounding. And then Jenna is an extremely intuitive actress who, you know, often does something, mixes it up between takes and does something different. And it's kind of like a whirlwind of energy, which I think Dolores is. Dolores is a disruptor in the film. And so I think that kind of, the combination, that complementary sort of, their complementary styles, I think create that incredible chemistry between them that you see in the film, that's also built on with it, you know, there's this attraction, but there's also this kind of friction. And I think that really helps the idea of these two people who met when they were teenagers, were high school sweethearts, have had very different lives since then and have come together, you know, and they have this, you know, this idea of what their imaginary perfect life could have been, and reality constantly butts up against that. And so you have this incredible attraction that goes way back, and this incredible bond, I think, that goes way back, you know, and the relationships that you forge in those teenage years are so powerful, aren't they? And they kind of, they impact you more than any other, really. But they've changed, you know, they've changed and they've moved on. And I think that life has changed, and they can't go back to who they were. And we talked about all of this. We talked about, you know, with Pablo, he is a very, the physicality of the character was really important to him. So he put on tons of weight for the role. He's very kind of cut and lean usually, and he's sort of just come off playing Master Chief in Halo right now. So he's been, I mean, which is a kind of superhero type, superhuman type role. So he's, you know, very sort of, you know, built and bulked up for that. But he put on kind of weight to make Wayland look more like a real character. So more like someone who would have lifted weights in prison, but not kind of with a personal trainer, you know, not kind of that. So someone who was strong, but so he did that. And he also grew up in the Pacific Northwest and had seen bikers and kind of had a sense of what they looked like, how they carried themselves, but also came up a little early and met with some of the bikers that we had kind of built connections with in the community, and kind of went to their clubhouse and kind of hung out with them and spoke to them about, you know, club life and biker life, and kind of, so did that research to just understand and just, you know, just, I think just almost watching also the physicality of the people that he was, you know, the community that he was representing. I think the physicality is a sort of very important way in for him. And then Jenna had just come off, this was her first major role back after having a child. And I think, you know, she was balancing feelings of wanting to be a good mother, but also, you know, spending long hours on set. And I think this idea of, she really got behind this idea of not showing mothers as Madonnas, as saints, as kind of this idea that you can be an imperfect mother and still be a worthy person, a worthwhile person to make a film about, and a worthwhile, you know, a character that we can root for, even if you're not perfect. And I think this idea that, you know, I think we hold mothers to and in cinema in particular, we hold mothers to a higher standard than we hold fathers. I mean, it's quite usual in films for fathers to go off and, you know, abandon their children and then redeem themselves somehow, but it's not for mothers. And I think we spoke about Dolores's imperfections a lot, and we spoke about letting, you know, not trying to kind of make her better, not trying to make her more likable, but really, you know, one of the conversations we had was before production was just how we would have to check that, how we would have to kind of, if Dolores was, that we would allow her to go to those dark places and those ugly places sometimes, and Jenna in particular said, I want to do that, so let's work on getting to those places and not glossing over, not trying to kind of redeem her, or, you know, to, you know, not make anything too easy for her, and not make her to, you know, actually allow her to be unlikable in certain scenes. And that's that's a really brave thing for an actor to do, I think. And she had a very personal reason for wanting to do that, which is that she's been very open about how difficult it is to be a single mother, and really wants to kind of normalize that, I think, and really wants to kind of be honest and have an honest conversation about that. So they were both just kind of, I think they just both, for actors like that to come onto a teeny tiny project like this, they have to be committed, and they were committed. I mean, Pablo even lived in a pop-up trailer in a field behind the main house where we shot. He lived there for the duration of the shoot to save us money so that we wouldn't have to put him up at a hotel. So he drove his trailer up from LA pop-up trailer and lived in it. I mean, he was like he was camping for a month. And he did that for us to save us money, so that we could put more money on the screen. And so they really can, I mean, I think you feel it. You feel how committed they are. And it's tough on a film like this. Indies are tough. This was a tough indie to shoot. We of course, like all indies, we didn't have enough time and enough money. So just to kind of stay laser focused as they were and to kind of pull off the sort of incredible performances that they did is, I feel so lucky as a first time director to have had that, and also to have had their help with the children, because they helped. I mean, so what you have is you know, I always think that sometimes in many cases acting is reacting, and to have a great scene partner who helps you through a scene, and they did that, you know, for the less experienced actors, you had these two veterans who, you know, and Jenna, for example, had been a child actor herself, started acting very young. And so she knew what the kids were going through. I mean, those kids had never acted before. The younger two had never been in front of a camera before. The older one, Chance, had done a few sort of commercials and a bit of catalog modeling, but nothing sort of dramatic like this. So really this was their first time, and we had to give them we gave them a little boot camp before shooting, where we just explained what a camera was and how it worked and why we'd need to do a scene 20 times over and over again. So we just explained these things to the kids, and we also kind of got them into their, you know, did little sort of backstory exercises with them, and you know, did tons of prep work with them. But I think it was really Pablo and Jenna being very generous scene partners that got them there, that got those performances. And there are two moments that I think of that really stand out, but there were tons of moments like this, but the two I remember in my head are in the scene where, so Denim, the youngest child, does not like to wear pants, prefers to wear dresses. And in real life, we don't put a label on that in the film. In real life, the actor who plays Denim is non-binary. The film doesn't sort of put a name to that, but I mean, Dolores just understands that her child prefers wearing dresses. I mean, that's kind of how she explains it. But then one day, there's a suggestion that Denim is being teased at school, and she doesn't want Denim to be teased, and she says, right, you're going to learn to wear pants now, and she tries to force them into pants, and Parker, who plays Denim, that was a difficult scene, because in that scene they have to spit at their on-screen mother, at Jenna, and that's a really difficult thing for a really polite, well brought up child to do, right? Spit at an adult that you like. I mean, it's the opposite of everything you're ever taught in life. And so Jenna just was so generous. She was like, okay, I know how to do this. She's like, we're going to make this a game. Show me, let's practice spitting. Like, just do it now, like before we're even rolling, and show me how much spit you've got. Oh, that's not very much spit. You can spit better than that. And she turned it into a game. She demystified it. She took away the stigma. She took away the taboo. And it was really with her help that we were able to get that scene, which is an incredibly hard scene to watch, because it's a difficult scene to watch. It's you know, a scene that, you know, of a substantial, you know, it's a substantial kind of, there's pain in that scene, and there's misunderstanding in that scene, and you know, you feel for everyone in that scene, and it's a tough watch. But actually shooting it, thanks to Jenna sort of really leading and really being an incredibly generous scene partner, we were able to get that scene. And similarly in the punch scene at the end, where Chancellor, the actor who plays Dodger, has to punch Wayland, Pablo's character, I know that Chance was really nervous about that scene, because he knew he needed to get worked up enough to want to punch someone. And what Pablo did for Chance was he even when the camera was shooting, when the camera was on, was doing Chance's coverage and not Pablo's coverage, he was on 110%. He made sure that he gave Chance something to react off of. And he really, so you can't, if someone is kind of, you know, if someone is giving you that much kind of intense emotion, you can build up to that, you know, that moment where you just hate this person and you want to punch them. He gave him what he needed to get to that moment. And then Chance saw that Pablo did that, and he was like, oh, wow, that really worked for me. I'm going to do the same for Pablo. And then he, you know, this 15-year-old kid, he understood in that moment that the idea of reciprocity in a scene and kind of doing that for your scene partner. And he did the same for Pablo. So even when his coverage was finished, he was still like on 110%. And it was a lovely moment where you could see the kids really learning off the adults as well.
That is fascinating. I love that. And, you know, a couple of questions I was going to ask you, you anticipated in that answer. I love, you know, your discussion of like the way that Pablo, for instance, sort of his performance in many ways sort of starts with his body and his, you know, his sort of imposing physicality, right? Like he's a huge guy. And there's a way in which he is off-putting to look at, and learning what he has done, you know, perhaps sets you up for a certain kind of understanding of who he is. But it's such, you know, it's so multi-layered, and, you know, there's something about the quality of his performance that is so profoundly giving, while also being aware of how he's being received. And Jenna, who I think is just one of our best actors, I think she is someone, there's almost no one better at conveying a woman with an edge, like a flinty edge, but yet underneath that is such heart that it will take your breath away.
I'm going to steal that flinty edge. That's perfect.
You know, and she is absolutely compelling on screen. And so, yes, the chemistry between them is just incendiary. You know, you absolutely understand what both draws them to each other, you know, on a magnetic level, but also makes them both so afraid to pursue anything. So that's one, and I love hearing that as actors, they are so profoundly generous with you know, the rest of the cast, and that's wonderful. So since I only have you for a little bit longer, I've got two more questions. You've talked about, you know, the challenges of making an independent film, a small film. It's always money, you know. There are always, you know, logistical issues that spring up that you can't just, you know, throw money or more time at because you simply don't have them. But I would love to hear, like, what were some of, you know, the toughest obstacles you faced in the making of this film, and how did you go about addressing them? You know, we're talking to a women in film audience, an audience of emerging filmmakers themselves. And so, you know, what sorts of things can you say to these filmmakers to say, like, okay, this is something that I faced as we worked on this film, and here's how we had to come up with a solution for it?
I mean, the thing I found that was the biggest difference between making the leap from shorts to features is it's a question of scale, right? So we shot for 25 days on Lorelei, 21 of which were in Oregon. Then we did 2 days in Sacramento and 2 days in LA. And so that, I mean, so already, you know, when you sort of previously you've been used to doing a short, and a short is 3 or 4 days, the stamina, I would say the biggest thing I wish I knew going in was the stamina that you would need to get through a feature film shoot versus a feature film edit, and the whole process of releasing a film. You know, this whole process has been 4 years in the making. And so I would want to just convey a very important lesson, a very important message rather, about resilience, and about kind of, you know, I think that the film is about resilience, and I think that there is resilience. And I think I started by talking about failure, and the, you know, that we don't talk about our failures enough. And the path to making this film and releasing this film has been littered with failure, and more failures than you can name. And I think that that's an important thing to let people know, because I think I always find it reassuring when other filmmakers say, actually, this was really hard. I remember reading that Barry Jenkins saying that making Moonlight almost killed him. And I understand that. I mean, the effort, the stamp in making an indie, you know, where you're wearing 100 different hats, it's tough. And so I think, you know, but to drill into specifics, I mean, there's not a thing that didn't happen to us. I mean, the ice cream truck, I learned on this film that picture vehicles are not meant to drive, they're just meant to look good. So our ice cream truck broke down literally every time we tried to drive it. So we often only got one take with that, and then it would break down, and then it'd be out for the rest of the day. So that's just, I mean, that's, you know, we found that thing on Craigslist. It looks great, but I mean, it drives bad. we, you know, and I would say, you know, the DP and I we really loved this idea of water in the film as a theme. I mean, that was something that sort of, it's there and it builds up to the ending, which is a, you know, water-based ending. Obviously, Lorelei is a mythical sea siren. There is this whole theme of water that runs through the film. The film starts with an image of a woman in utero, you know, in the fetal position, kind of gestating, waiting to be reborn, or, you know, if you will. And then, so water is a really, I think for me, symbolizes in this film a disruptive force. It disrupts, you know, because you know, and it brings change. And I think, you know, the saying goes that you never sort of step in the same river twice, right? And I think for me, water in this film it symbolizes change. And this film is firmly on the side of change. Like, there's a place for nostalgia. Nostalgia has a place in our lives. It can remind us of the sort of, you know, ephemeral nature of things, you know, that time has passed, that things that we've loved and lost. And I think there's something very beautiful about nostalgia, but ultimately it's very important that this film be on the side of change. And that's kind of where it lands. And water kind of is part of that whole, inside the sort of, you know, the world of the film. That's what water represents. And so we really had this whole visual plan for the film based on water. And we thought, we'll shoot in the fall, it'll be raining the whole time in Portland. And as it turned out, it didn't rain. We actually had some blazingly beautiful sunny days, and it was the fall. It was close to Thanksgiving. We were sure that we would get mist every morning, we would get cloudy skies, that we would get this beautiful kind of blue, green, misty kind of world. And actually we got really nice kind of sun a lot of the time. And we were like, well, this isn't the look that we designed for the film. And then, you know, I think when you're making a film with this kind of budget, and you don't have the budget to put up silks and block out the sun and kind of create that cloudy look, you just have to think, well, this was the plan. And that's good that we had a plan, because it kind of, we've done the thinking, but we have to be flexible. We have to kind of, you know, we have to make this work, because these are the cards that we've been dealt today. And I think actually what ended up really, you know, I think it's important to stress that if things don't work out the way you think they're gonna, it'll still be okay. So, you know, in this case, having those sunny days actually I think worked out well, because what it gives us is it gives us contrast. So, and that was something that I wanted right from the beginning. In my lookbook for the film, I wrote, I don't want this film to be one thing, one tone, one mode, one look. I want every scene should have color contrast. It should have emotional contrast. We should have, you know, maternal love alongside, you know, familial chaos and familial, you know, like we should have on the fridge, we should have like unpaid bills, but also children's drawings. Everywhere where you have a kind of, the contrast would be built into every scene and every moment to you know, so as not to flatten out the characters, like I spoke about in the beginning, to create rich, deep, three-dimensional characters. And so what the sunshine gave us when it came out, which it did often, it gave us contrast. It made the rainy days rainier almost. I mean, so, and I think that embracing that and actually realizing that there was a way that we could make that work for the movie was really, and I'm talking about, you know, there are so many logistical challenges to making this film, you know, like constantly being on the verge of running out of money, for example. You know, like we almost didn't shoot this film because we didn't, 2 weeks before shooting, we just couldn't get our budget down to enough to where it was, you know, to the point where, you know, we had our actors were about to come out, and we were like, the producer was like, we need to get this budget down. Like we need to sort of, you know, cut a third off this budget because we don't have this money, you know. And so we figured it out, you know. So at every point it felt like we were precarious and on the verge of not happening. And that was kind of, and we were always short of time, you know, working with kids as well who have reduced hours. You're working against that limitation. But I think creatively, I think that whatever ends up happening, you know, that there is a way of kind of making that work for your story. And if you've done the thinking about your story and you've kind of really done the deep dive into your story, and you have your sort of, I mean, we had a set of rules that we made for ourselves for Lorelei, and then, but it was great to have those rules, and we often broke the rules, but it was good to know what rules we were breaking and why. And like I said, it really helped to sort of, the fact that our sort of perfect plan for the look of the film was interrupted by the weather is just one example of how that was actually a gift, because it actually allowed us to kind of have this visual contrast in the film and have these bright, sunny, colorful moments next to the sort of gloomier ones. And it really actually helped the film, I think, become a richer film in the end, more than it would have been if I had gotten exactly what I had designed, actually.
Right, that's amazing. Okay, last question. I mentioned up at the top that one of the reasons that we love this film so much is that we have loved this film so much. And in fact, you were one of the recipients of a Women in Film Finishing Fund grant. Could you talk really briefly about, the impact of getting that grant, on actually delivering the final film that we now have access to? What did it allow you to do? How did you find out about the grant? What was the process like of getting it? Like, what did getting that grant mean for this film?
I mean, for me personally, making a film is tough, and post is especially tough place before you've kind of, you're in the sort of, you've been in the trenches for months, you've been in a sort of deep, dark edit room, and you've got all these pieces, and you're trying to make a movie out of it, and it can be a dark place. And I think out of that, many months into that, almost, I think about a year into that process, actually, when we were coming to the end of that, but still hadn't finished the film, I remember my mum was visiting from the UK, and she wanted to go to the Grove because she liked the waterfalls in the Grove or something, the water features or something. Mm-hmm. So we were in the Grove looking at the water features, and she was like taking pictures, and I was like checking my email. And I suddenly, for the first time in days, probably, I was happy to have my mum there, but I was sort of also deep into post. I beamed, and she was like, "You're beaming for once. You're smiling." And I was like, "Oh, Mum, I just had really good news." And I was just so happy because, and that was the email that we'd gotten the grant, because it's really tough. You can kind of lose. It gave me personally gave me a lot of confidence in the film, it was rallying. It was, when I told our team, everyone was like, "Hey, maybe we've got something," because you don't know. You make a film in a bubble, you're in post in a bubble. Until you start really getting it out there, you just don't know what the reaction is going to be. And that's scary. You've put so much of yourself into this, and so much time, and, blood, sweat, and tears. And then to have actually people respond to the story and respond to you as a filmmaker, just, it was a very special moment, and it meant a lot to me, and it really kind of rallied my spirits. And you were the first, Women in Film was the first organization that I feel like once the train is moving, lots of people jump on, but to be the first people, and you were the first to say, we're going to back this, was incredible. And you were the first, like no one else had kind of, it's not like someone, and it's hard to be the first person to make a judgment call on something and say, we're going to be the first and we like it. Lots of people come in second, third, fourth, fifth once, and that's the way it works with everything, right? With financing, no one wants to be the first to put in money, but once other people are putting it in, you're like, oh, maybe it is good, I'll put in, so that you were the first, and that meant a lot. Like, it felt that that you were willing to sort of take a risk on us meant everything. And then we were just on a practical level, the funds were indispensable. What you do with an indie is you spend all your money on production, and it's that you should budget for post, but you also never do, because there's not enough money, and every dime you have to spend it to get the film in the can. So we were really editing on a shoestring. We were editing in my editor's 1-bedroom apartment in Valley Village, and kind of it was a very sort of we just didn't have anything budgeted for post at all. And so what this grant did was it just allowed us to do the finishing that elevated it from a cut of the film that came out of the Avid, that was an Avid cut of the film, to actually a finished film. So we were able to license music, for example. And I feel like music for this film is so important, because you have again, it's part of this idea that these lives are rich, that there are storytellers, that you've got these country songs in the background, singing country songs that are sort of about yarns about love and loss and hope, and having those songs in the movie, I think you know, really just gives you a sense of place. It gives you a sense of, it really sort of really helps. I think give you a sense of place, and also kind of texture and richness, and, you know, just not sparse. And I didn't want the film to be sparse. And so that was really important. And we were able to license songs. We were also able to do some key VFX that we needed to do, that really sort of visually elevated the film. And it felt like a movie at the end. It went from feeling, you know, like a cut that we'd spat out of the Avid that, you know, was a movie, but was definitely had rough edges, to kind of being an actual film that we could sort of go to Tribeca with, and that we could sell, and that we could get out into the world. So it was, I mean, I'm not, you know, absolutely not exaggerating when I say we couldn't have done it without you. Like, I don't know where that money would have come from if you hadn't stepped in and done that for us. And I am just so grateful. And I think, you know, as female filmmakers, I think, well, what can I do? You know, and I just think we all have to, when you receive, you know, a sort of token of kind of support from your community like that, I always think we have to pay it forward. I mean, and so every kind of everything that happens, I always sort of think, well, how can we as a community of female filmmakers create this ripple effect of goodness, so that, you know, if you get some of the goodness passed on to you, you pay it forward. And that's just, it's so, I mean, and I feel like that the Women in Film has kind of really started a sort of chain of that for our film, because I think it will, you know, whatever, I think the goodness that comes from my being able to kind of finish a film and get it out there, I will try and pay forward. And I just would strongly encourage anyone who's kind of had any support and any mentorship, to do the same for others. I mean, so, you know, I just think I'm so grateful. I think you guys are wonderful. It's a big grant as well. Like, it's a lot of money, you know, for a small indie, it's a lot of money. So it made a huge difference.
I love that. I love hearing how impactful the grant was for you, and for this film. And I am so, so eager for people to get a chance to see it. Sabrina, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. I can't wait for people to check this out. I can't wait to talk to people about this film. Lorelei, available in select theaters on demand July 30th. If you are watching this before the 30th, Women in Film, we've got screening links available. You can check it out. Please hit us up at info@wif.org, or check us out at wif.org online. You can learn about all of our programs, including career development programs like the Film Finishing Fund, like our writers labs, like our directors labs, so that, you know, you can enter the ranks of creatives like Sabrina Doyle, who are just doing the damn thing and making it happen. Sabrina, it was wonderful to talk to you today. Thank you so much.
It was wonderful to talk to you.
All right, take care, everyone. We'll see you at the next Laptop Cinema Club. Bye.